There are evenings at Windsor when the light fades more quickly than expected, casting the long approach into shadow. In those moments, the gates appear almost symbolic, a boundary between what was once public certainty and what is now private retreat. For Prince Andrew, this quiet border has become the defining image of his present life. He was once introduced as the Action Prince, a man whose confidence came as naturally as his uniform. For decades, his role seemed assured: military service, ceremonial duties, and the visibility that accompanied life as a senior royal. Yet today, that assured presence has softened into something markedly subdued. The shift has unfolded not through any single dramatic event, but through a series of quiet recalibrations. Patronages paused, duties withdrawn, appearances reconsidered. What remains is the contradiction at the centre of his story. He is a prince by birth, yet increasingly detached from the privileges that once framed his daily existence. The monarchy, now guided by a need for transparency and institutional credibility, has reshaped its public face. In doing so, it has outlined the distance between Andrew's title and his current role. His home still stands behind high gates, but the life within is no longer one of official purpose. His diary, once filled with engagements, has fallen into silence. The mechanisms of royal support, protection, structure, visibility, have retreated, leaving a quieter world in their place. This is not the story of a single fall, but of a gradual, unspoken retreat from public life. A prince intact in title, yet transformed by absence. Long before recent scrutiny reshaped his public identity, Prince Andrew occupied a position that blended visibility, service, and institutional confidence. His naval career formed the backbone of this image. Years marked by operational involvement, disciplined routine, and the sense of purpose that accompanies active service. The Falklands conflict, often cited in accounts of his early adulthood, contributed to a perception of bravery and commitment that resonated publicly. In those years, the monarchy operated with a wide constellation of working royals. Engagements were numerous, representation spread across continents, and Andrew's confident temperament suited the international nature of his assignments. Trade missions, diplomatic outreach, and ceremonial presence combined to create a rhythm in which he seemed entirely at ease. His diary was full, his place within the institution was secure. His marriage to Sarah Ferguson brought another layer of visibility. For a time, they appeared to embody a modern, approachable version of royal life, one that carried a degree of warmth alongside the formality. Though their marriage eventually ended, their public roles continued. Andrew remained a familiar figure at national events, military commemorations, and overseas visits. The sense of activity, movement, and function sustained the broader image of a senior royal fulfilling his remit. The late 1990s and early 2000s offered perhaps the clearest expression of his prominence. His involvement with trade and business representation gave him influence within international circles. Patronages connected him to charities, institutions, and civic bodies that valued royal association. His presence at events, once assumed, rarely required justification. It was part of the established fabric of royal life. Looking back, this period reveals the height of the image he once held. It was not only built on tradition, but also on an implicit social contract: visibility in exchange for public trust, activity in exchange for continued relevance. Andrew carried the benefit of optimism, the assumption that his trajectory would remain upward, or at the very least, stable. But images, however durable they appear, remain vulnerable to shifting context. The world changed, expectations sharpened, and the foundations of his public presence were more precarious than they seemed at the time. What existed then now feels distant, a version of royal life shaped by another era. The period preceding Andrew's very public difficulties did not begin with spectacle, but with subtle shifts, movements so incremental they escaped broad attention at the time. His role within the monarchy gradually narrowed as the institution moved towards a more streamlined model centred on the direct line of succession. Engagements reduced, responsibilities thinned, and the once clear purpose of his public position became less apparent. Financial pressures added another form of quiet strain. Royal life behind the gates carries substantial upkeep, from residence maintenance to security requirements and personal commitments. As external sources of income contracted and certain business connections waned, reliance on long-standing friendships and private arrangements became increasingly significant. These networks, sometimes complex, formed part of a private world that was not always aligned with public expectation. It was within this environment that associations emerged which, in hindsight, contributed to reputational vulnerability. Social and professional circles intersected in ways that blurred the line between opportunity and judgment. Patterns that once appeared inconsequential later took on new meaning as wider scrutiny intensified. The optics, as observers noted, became difficult to separate from broader questions of responsibility. By the late 2010s, the veneer of continuity had begun to thin. Reports grew more focused. Past connections were revisited with fresh significance. Institutions once supportive applied a more cautious lens. Trust, from the public, from diplomatic partners, from organisations tied to his patronages, started to erode. The shift was neither sudden nor dramatic. It was gradual, cumulative, and quietly decisive. Within the monarchy, these developments were observed with increasing concern. The institution is shaped not only by duty, but also by perception, and perception had begun to move against him. Decisions that might once have been handled internally now required visible action. The hidden decline was no longer concealed. It was gathering momentum. This period marked the point at which Andrew's world began to contract. Public certainty gave way to private calculation. Connections once relied upon became sources of complication. The boundaries around his role tightened, not through formal declarations, but through the slow withdrawal of institutional confidence. Every long decline eventually arrives at a turning point, a moment in which perception alters so sharply that the past seems immediately redefined. For Prince Andrew, that moment came through a televised interview intended to clarify, to steady, to provide his account. Instead, it created a global reaction that few could have predicted in scale or intensity. Viewers responded not with reassurance, but with disbelief. Analysts, commentators, and members of the public questioned both judgment and awareness. What was meant to offer transparency instead raised further questions. In the days that followed, the consequences unfolded with unusual speed. Roles were relinquished, patronages suspended. Military affiliations, long tied to identity and service, were stepped back from. The monarchy acted decisively, prioritising institutional integrity and public expectation. Family support remained visible, yet the operational shelter that had surrounded Andrew for much of his adult life receded swiftly. This moment also reframed the years that preceded it. Associations previously discussed only in isolated contexts were revisited with new emphasis. Decisions made long before took on sharper relevance. The interview, though intended as a clarification, became a dividing line, before and after. In many ways, it marked the point at which Andrew's visibility collapsed. Public life, once structured around engagements and representation, narrowed to near absence. Appearances became rare, carefully considered, and largely private. The world that had once been navigated with confidence now required caution at every turn. The televised moment did not create the entire decline, but it crystallised it. It gave form to what had previously existed in fragments. And in doing so, it permanently altered the course of his public identity. What followed the critical moment was not a restoration, nor a swift recalibration, but a slow narrowing of Andrew's world. Public duties ceased almost immediately. Military titles and associations, once central to his identity, were formally relinquished. Patronages that had relied on his presence and engagement were reassigned, marking a further withdrawal from public life. Within the family, the dynamic shifted as well. King Charles III, now responsible for stewarding a monarchy shaped by scrutiny and expectation, approached decisions with long-term credibility in mind. While the personal relationship between the brothers remained intact, the institutional stance was firm. The future direction of the monarchy required clarity, and Andrew's circumstances no longer aligned with its public-facing priorities. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie maintained their closeness with their father, offering personal support separate from official roles. Yet their own positions within the royal landscape remained independent of Andrew's public standing. Their presence at events reflected their personal lives, not an extension of their father's former obligations. Royal Lodge, long associated with Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, became both sanctuary and symbol. Its quiet grounds offered privacy, but its upkeep and public interest created ongoing questions about sustainability and relevance. For Andrew, it represented continuity at a time when much else had altered, yet it also highlighted the contrast between title and function. In public life, his presence became limited to family moments, Christmas walks, occasional private gatherings, and moments within Windsor's closed environment. The rhythm of his days shifted from representation to reflection, shaped less by duty and more by distance. This was not exile, but nor was it rehabilitation. It was a form of managed isolation, a quiet existence defined not by punishment, but by consequence. Prince Andrew's story is no longer defined by ceremony or public engagement, but by the space that follows consequence. It is a story that underscores the tension within modern monarchy, how heritage coexists with accountability, and how public trust must be continually renewed, even for those born into its structures. His journey illustrates the limits of legacy. Titles endure, but the trust attached to them does not. The privileges that once operated as constant certainties now sit behind a different framework, one shaped by public expectation, institutional caution, and the memory of recent years. In this environment, visibility is not guaranteed, it must be justified. For the monarchy, the handling of Andrew's circumstances represents a broader recalibration. The institution has moved towards a quieter, more deliberate model, one that seeks stability and clarity rather than breadth. Its response to Andrew's situation reflects an understanding that the Crown's long-term standing depends as much on what it distances itself from as what it embraces. For Andrew, the path ahead remains undefined. His life is now shaped by stillness rather than duty, by private routine rather than public representation. What comes next is uncertain, not because of speculation, but because the framework that once guided him no longer exists. The unanswered question is not whether he will return to public life, but what his story means for the institution he was born into. In an age where accountability is demanded, not deferred, his journey stands as both marker and lesson. Some chapters end with ceremony, others close with silence. His has done both.